with posh voices.
Ah.
Jeans worn with jackets.
Make your mind up. That's what I'm saying.
Eating whilst acting.
Just swallow it. We'll wait.
Birds kept in cages.
Help me!
Room 101 with Alan Davies. These are a few of his least favourite things. Friday, 10 o'clock, BBC2.
Making a clean sweep now on BBC2 is The Janitor.
Howdy. I'd just like to apologize for what happened yesterday. I don't generally do things like that. Matter of fact, it's only the second time anything like that's ever happened. The first time, of course, was, well, let me tell you about it. You see, this whole universe here, now, me and God run this place, you see. And God come up to me and he said, hey, listen, I want you to do me a favor. Do him a favor as if I didn't already have a bunch of stuff to do. And I said, yeah, well, sure, what is it you want? And he said, listen, I want you to go down to the earth there, turn on the rain and wash it off. It's getting dirty. So I said, well, that's fine. And then he took off. He had some project going someplace. Well, I shot down there and I turned the rain on to wash her off. Then I went up, I was painting this planet up there, and Mars, I think it was. And I went down to get some paint. And wouldn't you know, if I got my checkbook. And I went down and got some more, got the checkbook and got the paint, and it turned out to be the wrong color red. And then I finally got the right color, and I was up there, I was painting away. And that is a big planet. I mean, it's just big. And it took 2 coats. Well, all of a sudden, I feel a tap on my shoulder, and I turn around, and there's God standing there, and he said, what the hell is going on? And I told you to go down and wash off the earth. That was 40 days ago, buddy. Now you got a flood down there. Oh, no. I run down there, and sure enough, a whole planet, colored water, a couple little mountains sticking out, and a boat floating around with some animals in it. Well, I drained her down. It was all right after that. But I'll tell you something. You know what? God forgot once. That's a fact. He forgot. You see, he sent his son down to earth, kind of spread a little love and cheer, and then we was all having trouble with that planet down there, and his son was going to spread a little light. And then God went off up into the Milky Way. He's putting some planets back up there, and oh boy, I'll tell you, that's tricky business. That is real tricky business. He never let me do that. And then, of course, we had the project going on Vandusia at the same time, so he was awful busy up there. While I was over at the moon, I was sweeping up. That place is a sure enough dust catcher. And all of a sudden, I heard all this commotion, and I turned around, I looked down to earth, and I thought, Jesus Christ, what the hell's going on down there? This big commotion down there, and they was tacking the kid up. They was banging nails in his hands. Well, I sent somebody up to tell God, and I shot down there to help the kid out. Well, by the time I got down there, they'd put him in a cave and rolled a rock in front of it. Well, I rolled a rock out and took the kid out and took him up to his father, and he's doing fine now. Well, anyway, I just wanted to apologize for what happened yesterday. And I'll tell you what, tomorrow I'll make the sun come up a half hour early to make up for the half hour late it was this morning, okay? Thanks.
If you find your exam results are better than you expected, or as bad as you thought they might be, don't panic. The BBC can help. For free and independent advice, call the Student Helpline on 0800 101 901 and find out everything you need to know, whatever your grades.
Now on BBC2, a look at the weather prospects with Michael Fish.
Hello there. Before we have a look at the British weather, we thought we'd have a look at the scene in Taiwan and China, because if you were watching earlier news bulletins, you'll know that they've had some horrendous flooding there just recently, and that was the effects of Typhoon Winnie. Here it is on the satellite picture. It moved in across China earlier on Tuesday, and now it's continued to drift inland, fizzling out, but it's still a really marked storm. Big circulation there, still giving some very strong winds and some very heavy rain as it continues to head northwestward, so obviously we're going to have to keep an eye on that for some considerable time. Passing by Shanghai, 151 millimetres of rain in only 30 hours. Now closer to home, if you have friends on holiday in Menorca, they haven't been doing very well either. 82 millimetres in the last 30 hours. That's about 3 inches or so, and they've had some very heavy thunderstorms, as you can see here on the satellite picture. They've not been alone though, because during the day some violent storms brewed up over parts of Italy. They drifted across towards Greece, and we've also seen some further storms across there in Sardinia and in Sicily. And in the evening we also had some thunderstorms across the British Isles, and one or two of those turned out to be quite heavy too, with hail and thunder. But basically high pressure holding on across the more eastern and northern parts of Europe, but Western Europe, these fronts trying to get in from the Atlantic, and still that sticky humid weather giving thundery showers right the way from the Mediterranean and through the central parts of Europe and the Alps, and even towards parts of the British Isles. The British scene though is dominated by the high pressure to the east. These frontal systems only struggling in from the west. Eventually I think they're going to come in, but more across the northwestern parts. Now these are the thunderstorms that came up during the afternoon, some quite vicious ones developed across just north of London through the Midlands, and then in the evening they rumbled up into northwest England, and those storms, or at least what's left of them, probably just showers by now, continuing to head away northwestwards, and some outbreaks of rain coming in from the west into western Scotland. A very sticky night yet again, and quite a misty one too, some patches of fog around daybreak which will lead us into a grey start to the day, but I think the sun should come through quite readily, except that is on parts of the east coast, and many eastern parts of England are going to be dry and bright. In the west there'll be more in the way of cloud, some lightish outbreaks of rain around to begin with, but as the sun comes through and the temperatures rise, so some of those bursts of rain could again turn out to be quite heavy and thundery. Big variation in temperatures because these winds coming in off the North Sea, bringing some fog too, will keep those coastal areas decidedly chilly, and it's going to be windier than of late in western parts too, quite a stiff breeze across Northern Ireland for instance, but the wind not enough to improve the air quality over central and eastern areas of England, and those temperatures again soaring as high as 30 degrees. Frontal system coming in on Thursday, bringing some outbreaks of rain chiefly to northern and western areas, onto thunderstorms again in the east, and then high pressure giving us a dry day for the most part on Friday, just an odd shower here and there.
Hello, a very good evening to you and a warm welcome to the Learning Zone. Education and information through the night here on BBC Two. A rundown now of what's in store for tonight's Learning Zone. The Open University begins in just a few moments, followed at 2 o'clock by Summer Nights, which focuses on music. At 4 o'clock it's languages, and then we'll be rounding off with the return to the Open University at 6. At 1 o'clock tonight, there's a look at One Building Society's new customer information system. Then at 1:30, finding the best way, mathematically speaking, to get flowers from Field and Glasshouse to the supermarket. First tonight, the outcome of the 1992 general election threw the political world into turmoil because the opinion polls had got it wrong. But why? As the OU finds out now, it would seem that the fault lies with the mysterious spiral of silence.
O'clock, and our view is it's going to be a hung parliament. This election is too close to call, and the likeliest outcome is the Conservatives short by 25.
We've won tonight a magnificent victory. A victory that many people thought was beyond our grasp, but one which the Conservative Party always believed was there for the taking.
If Labour takes it well, it's doing well. If Labour doesn't take it, they'll be quite upset, I suspect.
I being the returning officer for the Basing constituency.
The 1992 general election saw a surprise win for the Conservative Party. Right up until the eve of the election, it was the Labour Party that was well ahead in the polls. Yet despite the eve of poll prediction of a hung parliament with no overall majority, the Conservatives gained enough seats to form a government. So why were the polls so wrong?
So if Basildon is typical, then wait for much, much, much less swing than the exit poll earlier was suggesting, but very, very early results here.
A new opinion poll published today in the Sunday Times shows that people have had a right gutful of opinion polls. Of those questions, 63% said, piss off, I've got a train to catch. 28% said hanging should be brought back, just wait there while I go and get a rope. And the other 9% said that they were small cubes of orange-coloured wood.
Oh, I'm from National Opinion Poll. We're doing a survey in the area. Could you spare me some time to answer some questions? Sure. If there was an election tomorrow, which party would you vote for?
Opinion polls are a serious attempt to look at the way in which people intend to vote. Yet opinion polls don't ask everyone's opinion. So why do pollsters expect us to take their findings seriously?
It's difficult to believe, but a representative sample of, let's say, 1,000 or 2,000 people has the same statistical reliability in the Republic of Ireland with 3.5 million adults as it does in Great Britain with 40 million adults, as it does in the United States with 180 million adults. Well, how can this be?
It's rather like eating a cake. You don't need to eat the whole cake to know what it tastes like. You only need a small slice. And that works in opinion polling as well. We don't need to know what the whole population thinks by asking the whole population.
A vote for Liberal Democrats is a wasted vote.
Yes.
If there was an election tomorrow, which party would you vote for?
Labour.
It's in much the same way that I know what the Thames is going to taste like by drinking a small amount of it. I don't need to drink the whole of it, I can actually tell. And providing I actually have a representative sample of the whole population, then a smallish number of people will enable me to predict what the whole country is actually thinking.
The key seems to be the type of people that you ask. They need to be representative of the population that's likely to vote. Pollsters say that to be accurate, you have to ask at least 1,000 people how they expect to vote. But where do you find them? Can you simply pick them off the street? Well, not if you want to represent the whole population. Statisticians say the most reliable method is to use what's called random or probability sampling. Suppose you randomly select 1,000 names from an electoral register, so everyone has exactly the same probability of being chosen. You could then call on those named individuals and ask their opinions. That would allow you to learn about the whole population just from the sample. But it's not what opinion pollsters do.
The choice of which sampling method to use is really a trade-off. It's a trade-off between speed, it's a trade-off between cost, and it's a trade-off between the need for accuracy. The basic decision is going to be made between a probability sample and a quota sample. Probability sample with everyone having equal opportunity of selection. The quota sample, the interviewers being given the opportunity to choose respondents between perhaps a certain number of men and a certain number of women, certain number of younger, middle-aged and older people, certain number of middle-class people and working-class people and the like, against quota controls derived from census data usually.
Hello, I'm interviewing on behalf of...
Stopping strangers in the street, the pollsters ask questions that categorise the respondents. And by fulfilling preset quotas, they can take a snapshot of public opinion at any one time.
The kind of sampling that's normally used for opinion polls is what's called quota sampling, where the interviewer is instructed to find so many people of different types, so many men of a certain age group who are working in a certain class group, and so on. And by representing all the different age groups, the different sexes, class groups, and so on, we can build up a small sample which is still fully representative of the whole population.
It's very important with any opinion poll to ensure that the sample we do take is really representative of the population, whatever population we're trying to measure. Typically, when we do surveys of the general public, we ensure that the sample is distributed geographically across the country. And within each sampling point that we choose, we ensure that the sample is representative by the demographic profile of the population that live within that area. For example, by age, sex, social class and working status.
But because the pollsters don't speak to everyone, the sample won't reflect the population exactly.
If, for example, you take a coin and you toss it up in the air, then the proportion of heads and tails that you should end up with would be 50% heads and 50% tails. And it's obvious the more times you toss the coin in the air, the more likely the answer is to approach 50-50. And as it is, so it is with sampling the population as a whole. Of course, there are 43 million voters out there, and if we start by interviewing only 10 of them, then the results will not be representative. But as we increase the sample size, so we should approximate to, start to converge on the results that we would get if we went out and asked all 43 million.
Common sense suggests that as sample size increases, the sampling error decreases. And statistical calculations confirm that with a sample of 1,000 people, the error is roughly plus or minus 3%. This falls to under 2% for samples greater than 3,000. So, did the pollsters get it wrong in 1992 because any results based on a sample are subject to sampling error?
The opinion pollsters have begun an inquest into why they apparently got the results so wrong. The Market Research Society says it's launching an immediate inquiry. On the night before the election, the BBC's poll of polls showed the Conservatives on 38%, Labour on 39%, and the Liberal Democrats on 19%. 4 opinion polls were used to get that result: Gallup, Mori, NOP, and ICM. The large total sample size of 8,141 people suggested a margin of error of 1.5%. That meant the Conservatives could have been as high as 39.5%. Labour could have been as low as 37.5%, with the Liberal Democrats on 17.5%. The actual results were well outside the margin of error. The Conservatives actually got 43% of the vote, 3.5% higher than the poll suggested was possible. Labour ended up with 35%, well below the figure suggested by the margin of error. Only the Liberal Democrats, who ended up with 18%, were within the margin of error.
It's unlikely that the sampling error was the main cause of the problems in 1992. So what about the quotas themselves? How appropriate were they? Comparing pre-election polls with exit polls, carried out as voters left the polling stations, one company, National Opinion Polls, found that 70% of their sample were homeowners. But in their exit poll, this figure was 75%. They found that council tenants were 23% of the original sample, compared to 16% in the exit poll. NOP figures for social class tell a similar story. 42% of the campaign sample stated that the head of household had a white-collar job, but this figure was 54% during the exit poll. With manual blue-collar jobs, the balance is reversed. 58 in campaign polls, but only 46 on election day. Those findings were similar for most of the polling companies. What this meant was that the pre-election quotas contained a bias. They were too strongly slanted towards those more likely to vote Labour. Why was this?
For the most part, the opinion pollsters rely on a survey known as the National Readership Survey, whose primary purpose is, in fact, is to get a reasonably accurate measure of the relative readership of newspapers and magazines, and not necessarily to acquire an accurate social profile of the population. And certainly comparing the results of the National Readership Survey in 1991 with the results of the census undertaken in that same year did seem to suggest that there were some discrepancies between the social profile of the population as measured by the National Readership Survey and that of the census, and that in particular it would appear that the National Readership Survey suggested that, broadly speaking, the population was a little more working class than it actually was.
Quota sampling has its problems, but even some academics agree that these may be preferable to the problems of random sampling.
There are two main reasons why polling companies don't use random sampling techniques. The main reason is cost. It's actually very expensive to go and find a specific person when that person isn't in, to go back, to call again, and to keep on calling until you find them. The sheer cost of that, obviously, is enormous. The second problem is a problem of response rate. What's very clear on the basis of random sampling, of going to specific targeted people, is that the response rate of those surveys are actually quite low.
Polling companies need to decide between probability and quota sampling. But what role do the media play in this decision? After all, they commission many polls.
Probability sampling is wonderful if you have the money and the time, but a decent probability sample takes 2 or 3 weeks to conduct. The hard truth is that in politics, especially in the rush of a general election campaign, there's not the time to conduct a good probability sample poll. The truth is, it has to be quota polls in a fast-changing political environment. The challenge to the pollsters is not to move from quota back to probability polls, but to get quota polls right.
And they had 2 polls, one quota sampling and one random sampling that had errors more significant than any errors.
It seems certain that the arguments about random versus quota sampling will continue. But the problems associated with the quotas still only account for some of the error in forecasting the 1992 outcome. The Market Research Society report also blamed late swing as a factor.
Opinions as the ripples on the surface of the public consciousness, shallow and easily changed.
Late swing can be people moving from one party to another, or it can be those people who didn't know or said they didn't know what they were going to vote for immediately before the election, but then ended up voting a particular way, or alternatively people who said, I'm certainly going to vote this way, but then didn't go and vote.
The evidence of late swing itself came from panel surveys, that is, surveys in which people who had been interviewed before polling day were again interviewed thereafter. What those panels indicated, broadly speaking, was that there was a movement of the order of around 1% or perhaps 2% from Labour to the Conservatives, but there wasn't a sufficient movement amongst these people to take up all of the difference between the 1% Labour lead that the polls were indicating and the 7.5% lead that eventually pertained.
Although the ballot is secret and no one knows which way people vote, it seems from the result that people who were undecided before the election were more likely to vote Conservative.
My own view is that Sheffield Rally frightened the troops. The week before polling day, Labour had a triumphal jamboree in Sheffield. 10,000 people stomping their feet and cheering Neil Kinnock. Kinnock went hyper.
Well, all right.
About 10% of the people who said they intended to vote Liberal Democrat in the election the following week didn't support the Liberal Democrats, most of them going home to the Tories. That, I think, was enough to swing the election.
So late swing was also important. But even then, the effects of inaccurate quotas and late swing was still not enough to account for the difference between the pollsters' predictions and the election outcome. To explain this difference, the Market Research Society turned to another theory.
I'll tell you what, it's not just me, but see what this